Would you please take your seats and we'll commence this meeting of the Auckland Council Komiti Whakarite Mahiri, the Planning Committee, on this day, the 5th of November. And I welcome all the members, Mayor Goff, the councillors and independent Māori Statutory Board members, and members of the public and press who are with us as well. Now, we've got an agenda before us that is going to address a number of key items in the planning of the city today, but I'll take apologies at the outset. I have received apologies from Councillor Kuhn for lateness on council business, Councillor Alfilipina for absence, Councillor Chris Fletcher for lateness, so I'll take those. Now, I think Councillor Tracy Mulholland was an early departure. She will be joining us online, I think.
Thanks,
and she's
Chair.
on, and it's an early departure there. And same, I've accepted an electronic link for Councillor Stewart, who's online. So we'll note all that. And I will move, Councillor Bartley will second the motion to accept the apologies. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. And declare that carried. I also need to actually move the motion to accept Councillor Stewart and Councillor Mulholland to attend on by electronic link, and Councillor Simpson moved, and I heard a second on my left. Councillor Casey. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Are there any declarations of interest, members, under item 2 on any matter before us today? There being none, we'll move to the confirmation of the minutes, and I'll move accordingly. The confirmation of the minutes of 1 October, both the open record and the public excluded record. And thank you, Councillor Cooper, for the second. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. There are no petitions under item 4, which takes us to public input under item 5. There have been 5 requests, and they all satisfy our standing orders, members. Now, some of them are repeat requests. So I have replied through our governance support for those that are coming back on the topic of inclusionary zoning and housing for older persons to address the report and any new information that they might have rather than repeat what they conveyed at a more recent meeting. And I think that is the expectation of the members, not just as me as chair. So running through the requests, and then we'll go to the first one. We have Mr. Barney Irvine, who, of course, we all know, runs the AA here in Auckland. On the AA survey on congestion charging. Then we will go to Mark Lockhart of the Tree Council, and that's relating to item 10, notable trees, and the recommendations there. Then we'll head and discuss the next 3 contributors under public input relate to housing for older people and inclusionary zoning. And first up, we've got Robin Ellison on housing for older people, and Imogen Schutz on housing for older people and inclusionary zoning, and then finally Brendan Rigby on inclusionary zoning. Now, I think we've covered it all, and to start things off, welcome Barney Irvine from the Automobile Association of New Zealand. Yes, please take the centre seat there, Barney. And Barney, thanks for your presentation in advance, and we'll put that up now. And for each presenter under public input today, we've allowed 5 minutes. Welcome, Barney. All in your good hands right now.
Okay, well, look, thanks very much for the opportunity to present.
Can you activate your microphone? It's the right-hand button. Talk.
And do I have to hold this down? Or? Great. Look, this is an issue that we've followed closely for a number of years. I'll describe the AA as a cautious supporter of congestion charging. We see obvious potential benefits of it, but we're also we face a situation where our members are still concerned about many aspects of it, and so is the public. So it's something that we want to see a lot more information on before we're convinced that it's the right solution for Auckland. By releasing this survey, what we've wanted to do is help move the debate forward on it. We've been really frustrated by the lack of progress on it over the last 3 years, and what we really need to see as the immediate next step is for the findings of the government's congestion question working group to get out there into the public realm. If the case stacks up for congestion charging, well, what we really want to see is an in-depth, meaningful public discussion, and we need to start that sooner, not later. And we don't want to wait until congestion gets to pre-COVID levels before we even start talking about it. So on to the survey itself. We ran this in August, about 1,200 completed responses, both from Auckland and Wellington. Interestingly enough, the results from the two cities were pretty much identical. So what you're going to see today is a combination of both. The results have been weighted to match the underlying population. So you can see there something of a skew towards older folks. What did we find? Well, the key takeout really is surprise, surprise, congestion charging is going to be a hard sell. The question we put there to our members was, based on what you know about it, what do you think of it? 45% don't like the idea, 29% do. And that concern or the scepticism really speaks to the expected sorts of concerns, the concerns we've seen before with this. So we can see over to the right there a big chunk of people who are very concerned about issues like access, people in different parts of the city being disproportionately affected, equity, of course, and heritage. We've paid for those roads. Why should we, in the past, why should we pay to use them again? Other concerns that came through unprompted: affordability. This is a very big one. Absence of choice. I don't drive because I want to. A lack of faith in transport planning, and the lack of a compelling PT alternative. Look, and just on that affordability issue, what we're seeing with our members at the moment are the highest levels of financial insecurity that we've seen since the global financial crisis, and that sentiment is reflected throughout the survey. And because of it, people are struggling to see past the costs with congestion charging. They're seeing it in terms of stick, not carrot. And so one question we put to them was, well, imagine, we could put in place a charge or a system that would halve the time you lost to congestion. What would the charge be worth to you per day? And 53% of people said nothing. Now, interestingly, when we channeled that down, when we filtered that down to respondents who were just peak hour commuters, i.e. the people that would benefit from this most, the response was just the same. Look, while it is a difficult task, it's not an impossible one. And so we asked a slightly different question here. We asked, how would you react if a congestion charge was introduced? And what we see is that chunk, or that core of negativity, gets a fair bit small. It comes down to under 40%, with 17% of people saying they'd take to the streets, another 22% of people saying they'd vote the buggers out. But what you end up with is a sort of a simple majority there that could be a lot more tractable. What we see is that the greater the geographic coverage of a scheme, the greater the negativity. So relative comfort with the idea of a CBD cordon, but significantly less so with the idea of a network-wide charge. Strong expectations of exemptions, and that reflects the concerns about fairness and equity, and a strong desire to see any additional revenue reinvested in infrastructure, both PT and improving roads, and in offsetting the costs people face elsewhere. So the advice we're sort of offering up to the officials as they move this forward. Look, the negativity concern is to be expected. We've seen this right around the world, and it's only logical that we'd see it here. It's also very understandable given that people haven't had any positive information or any information at all about congestion charging for the last few years, since it was really baked into ATAP. The next step really needs to be to fill that vacuum, and I mentioned the congestion question findings. They need to come out as soon as possible. Big bang decisions are not going to work here. This process has to be very much incremental. It needs to go hand in hand with a very clear sense of benefits coming from public transport, and it needs to go hand in hand with a very clear sense of where additional revenue will and won't be spent. So that takes me a little over time. Very happy for any questions.
Thank you, Barney. Nice and snappy and very clear. Thanks for sending through the information earlier that we could have a look at. Now, just at the outset, I just want to say that on our Forward Work Programme members, you will note, I think it's on page 85, we were expecting a report on the congestion question, the main findings report it's termed, I think, about now or December. Now, we've got a new government, of course, and we now have, as of Monday, a new Minister of Transport. So I think it's fair to just, because this is an environment we're collaborating with government agencies on, the main findings report will be with us soon. And does the Director of Strategy have an update? We're just waiting for the new Minister to take the main findings report to the Cabinet first, I think. Is there anything? Sorry.
No, through the Chair, that's right. It is in the government's hands, and it was always going to be something that would happen post-election. So we now have a new minister. It may well go to Cabinet in December, but that's not our call. I'm not sure where it's at in the system at the moment. And then shortly after, we'll have it before us here in Auckland at the Planning Committee. So, questions of Barney. Barney, first up, Councillor Walker.
So look, I've got a couple of questions.
Sure.
And the first question is essentially the post-COVID question. So what we've seen is a dramatic shift in people's travel because of flexible hours. That applies to councillors, applies to my son, for example, applies to many people. And essentially that's a carrot situation rather than a stick. So people are choosing not to drive at peak times because their workplace is offering flexible time, conceivably offering incentives and so on. So my question around that is, has the AA considered that and considered that as a more effective mechanism to get the change? And what I would put to you is, are not those incentives that would effectively be offered by an employer conceivably much greater than the cost approach or the stick approach? And is that approach more equitable in respect of your members? Look,
it could well be, and I guess to answer the first part of that, yes, we have considered it. And in fact, we've commissioned quite a big piece of research by NZIER to look at the benefits from an economic and environmental perspective of working from home, say 1 day a week. I guess the issue is none of us know where that's going to go, where working from home is going to go. It's already moved quite a lot, and what world we'll end up in when we come out the other end of this process, nobody knows. So we certainly do not want to rule out the possibility, if a tool like congestion charging looks good, we certainly don't want to rule it out before we have a sense of where things are going to go. My sense would be that, yeah, there's not going to be just one solution to this problem. There's going to have to be multiple.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm just going to have to cut you there.
2 questions.
Unfortunately, I've got 6 people wanting to ask questions. I have to go by the standing orders, and I'm allowing 1 question per councillor.
Does it say that in standing orders?
It says in standing orders, 5 minutes all up, presentation and questions.
But it doesn't say 1 question in standing orders.
No, but I'm saying that it's in my discretion.
Your discretion, okay.
Yes. So I am giving everybody a fair chance to ask a question. And I'm very mindful of members reminding me to keep to time in this meeting, okay? So I've had those requests in the past, and I'm doing that now. Councillor Cashmore.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Barney, where the congestion charging, smart transport pricing systems have been introduced overseas, it's usually been a zero or close to zero-sum game. So you introduce a congestion charge but reduce other taxes. You didn't put that option to your members as such that I see in your survey. Would you think that would change opinions?
We did mention it in the question about what would you like to see other revenue done, what would you done with the other revenue, and that was sort of high up the list anyway, offsetting the charges that people face elsewhere. But we didn't have a specific question on it, no. But I'm sure that would, yeah, we can see that would be positively received.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Casey, please.
Barney, of the 650 people from Auckland who answered your survey, did you do an analysis of where they reside?
All across the city. Yeah, a broad spread, and I can't quite remember to what extent we build that into the survey design, but typically we get good coverage. It's right around the city.
The question didn't relate to it. It was about, my impression would be that if you live further away in the south, for example, you'd be less inclined to pay a congestion charge.
Very possibly so. And what I was also going to say is our representation in some parts of the city, including the south, is not as good as others.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Casey. And Councillor...
Thank you for your presentation. Do you think the detrimental impacts of COVID on household incomes affected the response that you had, or do you think that it would be a consistent response to a congestion charge, or is perhaps the thinking council perceivably is adding yet another rate?
I think the COVID situation unquestionably had an impact on it, and I mentioned that what we're seeing at the moment is levels of financial security that the lowest we've ever seen, and there's just no way that cannot have affected people's views. And maybe if we ask these same questions in 12 or 18 months, we could get quite a different response. Maybe more than 12 or 18 months, unfortunately, but yeah.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Dalton. And Councillor Sayers, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for your presentation. I was interested in the further, picks up a couple of other councillors, further people away from the CBD, perhaps the less positive they were about the idea. So does the association have any early thoughts about the fuel tax, being in place, but within the CBD, the congestion charge occurring? And if that was a model that we could look at, a hybrid model, would the fuel tax need to disappear somehow from the CBD? So I guess, so in a nutshell, could the original fuel tax remain, but the congestion charge be just for the CBD area?
Yeah, haven't thought about that. to be honest, haven't seen those sorts of issues kind of dissected in that way.
Yeah, okay.
But certainly approaching it as a cordon, seems to us a likely and logical first step. I mean, I made the point about incrementalism.
Yeah.
And that would, and so how the regional fuel tax would fold into that, I'm not sure. It might get a bit complex if you tried to, require that some continue to pay it and some that don't. The regional fuel tax is clunky enough as it is.
Okay, well, your answer is helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Sayers. And Councillor Newman, finally.
Good morning. Apologies for my late arrival. I'm sorry if you've already addressed this, but just for my benefit, so would you accept that a congestion charge to price behaviour works best when there is an alternate transport mode available for people to make a decision to switch?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's that's one of the differences that Auckland faces relative to a London, Stockholm, or Singapore, right? Which are the success stories that people often hold up, and that's one of the real challenges we face. I guess what I would say in response to that is, by citywide, our PT coverage isn't as good as other cities, and may never be as good. But some parts of the city are pretty well covered, including the CBD. And so you could design the scheme to correspond with the CBD. And the other point I'd make is it's not just about getting people out of cars and onto PT. A lot of the benefit comes from, for instance, discretionary travel being postponed or cancelled, right? Trips to go shopping at 8:30 in the morning, which happen a surprising amount. And if we look at Stockholm, where there was a 20% reduction in traffic volumes as a result of following the cordon scheme, about half of that, almost half of that, came from people switching to public transport, but a quarter of it came from discretionary travel coming to an end. So just to say that it's not just about that PT switch, but I take your point.
Well, I mean, I can absolutely see the inequality of this, where you are providing for a price to people in quite distant locations that don't have an alternate to your price travel.
Yeah. Well, yep, and so then possibly you need to look at discounts and exemptions and offsetting costs in other parts of it. But again, those are all these sorts of things that we want to see fleshed out in the congestion.
In the main
question
findings
work.
report, we'll see that when it comes, once it's cleared Cabinet. So look, thanks, Barney. Thank you to the AA. The sample size was quite considerable, so I commend you on that and the range of questions that you put to your members there too. The results are not dissimilar to what those in our equal positions in Stockholm received. It was a negative response pre the implementation, and if you ask anybody in Stockholm now, in fact, the post-implementation, the surveys are very supportive of
and it's similar in London as well,
Yep.
until recently.
Yeah. And in both cases, yes, they did have great public transport, but in London and Stockholm, they really beefed up their active transport on the back of the cordon charging, which is something we've got to do as well. Thank you, members. Thank you, Barney. Thank you, the AA. Thank you, members. Would somebody like to, Mayor Goff and Councillor Walker, second, acknowledging the AA's contribution here today. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Thank you, Barney. Thank you. Now we will go to public input from Mark Lockhart from the Tree Council. Welcome, Mark. Thank you. We've got a presentation from Mark. And Mark, we've received your presentation and we've got that up now. And you're here to discuss notable trees, which is item 10. In your hands, Mark.
Thank you. My name's Mark Lockhart. I'm a board member with the Tree Council, and I'm standing in for Mel's Barton, who is unable to make it today. The agenda report states this requires a substantial commitment by Council to ensuring the protection of any notable trees or groups of trees which meet the AUP notable tree criteria. There are many such trees, over 500, already nominated and assessed by Council as meeting the criteria, but which are not currently protected. These trees must be added to Schedule 10 as soon as possible to ensure their protection. In addition, there will be other trees across the city that can qualify for scheduling, but which are currently unprotected. We must find and protect these trees now. There is no other way to protect significant trees under the current planning scheme. There's no interim protection for these trees, and many of the trees have been on the list for years. If the land changes hands, these trees can simply be removed. Many of the trees have already been lost. I'd be interested to know whether there's any record or assessment of that. If the Council is serious about making any attempt to prevent further destruction of the most important trees in the city, then opening the new schedule to new nominations is essential. If this does not happen, these trees will most definitely be lost as development intensifies in future years. These are by definition the largest, most significant trees in Auckland. Only the best of the best can qualify for Schedule 10 notable trees. The recommended option 5 means that nothing will be added to the schedule. So to close the door on new nominations and on adding nominations that already qualify is to state that Auckland Council has no interest or responsibility to protect the most significant trees in Auckland. Is that the legacy you wish to leave future generations? Large trees are particularly vulnerable and will be lost for a generation if they're not protected. There are 5 options presented by Council. We'll take those as read. Missing is option 6, which is a hybrid approach which incorporates options 2 and 3. Option 5, the do nothing option, is totally irresponsible and will result in the loss of significant public assets which Council is aware both qualify for scheduling and have been formally nominated. Please take the opportunity now to prevent the inevitable destruction of Auckland's last remaining significant trees that can qualify for Schedule 10 notable trees. Please support this new recommendation. Option 6, hybrid approach which incorporates options 1, 2 and 3. Prepare a plan change to add existing nominations which merit inclusion to Schedule 10 and correct any new errors or inconsistencies that have been identified, and in addition call for further nominations from the public to expand Schedule 10 and Appendix 1G, while also commencing an incremental review of Schedule 10 and Appendix 1G. At the very least, the 500 trees that have been nominated and qualify should be added to the schedule. This is a photo of Canal Road which shows a scale of trees which will be potentially lost if Council doesn't act. I have lay people asking me more and more what is happening to the trees in our city. They just can't understand why trees are being removed all over the show. And they're blissfully aware of the fact that in 2012 tree protection rules were removed and are shocked by it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. That's great. So questions of Mark on behalf of the Tree Council here, standing in for good old Mel's, acknowledgement to Mel's, and questions please, members. Councillor Cooper first.
Thank you. Thank you for your submission. I actually, when I'm re-looking at these recommendations, when I looked at it, I thought, oh, doing option 4, that's the recommendation. But when I dig deeper, it is option 5. It is do nothing. So I suppose that's, I guess my question is, why is it not so clear in here? Because I'm a bit, as I read through it, I mean, I can see further, and it says earlier, oh, we recommend to basically do nothing, but the recommendations aren't particularly clear. So
can we come to that at the report rather than
Okay.
ask Mark that? I know exactly what you're referring to.
So, okay, the question is, so if we did go for option 4, is that at least, I mean, would you be comfortable with that, or is that as some sort of compromise? Which was to review the existing schedule and take on the nominations, the current nominations.
It's certainly better than option 5, the do nothing option. As indicated, option 6 is our preferred option, obviously, but that is significantly better than option 5.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Are there other questions, members of Mark? Deputy Mayor, please.
Would you bring this mark up to all trees or just natives or trees of user system to sort that out?
That would apply to all trees.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Walker.
Well, has the Tree Council got any resource it could make available to assist in this process that you're suggesting? Because part of the problem we've got is the council is very resource constrained. Quite obviously, if you can assist with the identification of various trees and so on in a collaborative way, and the council's looking at partnerships, that could fast track things.
Yeah, just before Mark asks that, I'm sure that the Tree Council can make submissions, etc. But this, when something requires a plan change, you actually rely on the resources of this council and the resources that you can contract in as well, councillor. It's not. I mean, I'll ask the Director of Strategy here to comment on this.
I was actually directing my question to Mr.
I know.
Lockhart, who's the submitter, not to you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
If that's possible.
It is possible, and I'm responding.
But you spoke earlier about time. I'm trying to keep things simple and just get a direct answer from the submitter.
Yes, and I'm sure Mark will tell us his organisation is very willing to contribute through the channels that are provided to them. Mark.
Yes.
Thank you, Mark. Director of Strategy, do you want to just comment on that? Because I've heard it a bit that you can somehow just involve groups to participate in a regulatory process of working up a plan change. Can you just tell us what the parameters are here, please?
Thanks through the chair. Look, the work would need to be done by council staff, and that could include contracted staff if that's what we choose. But that's under a contract and a management framework for that work. However, the public are involved, or particularly interested parties are involved through the submission process. But sometimes we also do, kind of pre-formal process submissions and opportunities to get involved. So it really depends on the issues and the way in which we might want to engage on an issue. But in terms of preparing advice to whether it's elected members or hearing panel, that would need to be done by staff, or if it's not by staff, through a contract procurement process on behalf of the council staff.
Thank you for that. Our last question, Councillor Newman, please.
Good morning. As a matter of principle, is it your contention that stakeholders, the public, interested parties, should be able to go along and to identify a tree that they consider notable for consideration and inclusion on a schedule if that tree is on private property and the landowner doesn't consent to that?
It's a difficult question. I think it's important that the most significant trees in our community are identified, and how you deal with that from the perspective that it's on private property is very difficult. That's exactly what's happening at Canal Road. I guess one final observation I'll make is that previously, when properties were purchased, a potential purchaser was aware of what trees were on the property, and they actually factored that into their due diligence, and now that doesn't happen. So, I think there's an onus on the private property owners to actually be aware and acknowledge that they have a significant tree on their property. And I'm not sure how you factor that in and how that relates to your question. But.
Yeah, I don't think you answered my question. My question was specific. If that tree should be able to be notified and scheduled without the property owner's consent.
Yes, I think it should be identified. Trees that should be able to be identified on private properties. And scheduling is a process, I understand, yeah.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Mark. They're all the questions. Thanks for your submission again, and always Tree Council make a huge effort in this regard. Massively committed. We appreciate that. Thank you. And do I have a mover of acknowledgement for Mark and the Tree Council submission? Councillor Bartley and Councillor Cooper. Thank you. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Thank you very much. Now we will head now to discuss housing, and first with us to discuss housing for older people and inclusionary zoning is Robin Allison. Robin, welcome. And you've got support as well. Now we have a presentation, I think, from Robin as well. And this is from Earthsong Eco Neighbourhood.
Tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Robin Allison. I am an architect by background, and I was the main driver of the Earthsong Eco Neighbourhood out in Ranui, West Auckland. I've come to talk to you about, very briefly really, about the co-housing model, because I think it's a really excellent model for senior housing, and there are many senior co-housing neighbourhoods across the world, and particularly in the United States. And it also really fits the inclusionary zoning aspect that you're considering. And a lot of those older people are single older women as well, and it's a model that's very good, and I'm going to show you an example of that a bit later. So I'm just going to run very quickly through what is co-housing and use Earthsong as an example to illustrate some of those. So very in brief, co-housing, they're small-scale neighbourhoods. Everyone owns their own private self-contained dwelling, and there are also extensive common facilities. So there's both individual households and shared facilities. They're designed to encourage a sense of community, to make it easy for people to come out of their house and feel like they're part of a wider neighbourhood. they're self-managed by the residents who live there, and they're really a very good housing model for senior housing and also for intergenerational housing, which I personally think is an even better option. So just to introduce Earthsong, we have 32 homes on 3 acres, 1.2 hectares out in Ranui. We've been finished there for 12 years now, so we're very established and have a lot of experience to offer. And just to look at the site plan, one of the key things about the layout is that the car parking is on the edge of the site, and then the rest of the community is pedestrian, which makes a huge difference to how it feels and how much land there is and how easy it is to be neighbourly, really. So we are medium density housing by definition, but I think you'll agree when you see it that it's completely unlike any other medium density housing in Auckland. Because we work together. So the co-housing elements that I mentioned before, scale, roughly sort of 15 households to 30 households is the right kind of scale to have enough diversity within the community and still form a cohesive group. A range of dwelling types and sizes. So at Earthsong we have 1, 2, 3 and 4 bedroom homes. We also have single level ground floor homes for older people and upstairs apartments, etc. So enough diversity that people can remain in the neighbourhood while perhaps shifting, upsizing or downsizing within the neighbourhood. There are shared facilities, so we have a big common house. All co-housing communities have some form of common room or common house, which is also part of our home, but it means there's a place where we can gather, eat together, feel like we're part of a neighbourhood. Designs are carefully thought through to facilitate community while maintaining privacy. So that's sort of giving people choice about how much they want to interact at any one time. And of course, as soon as you have common facilities, you need a system of management, and co-housing has a very well-developed system of management structures which make them very successful. Clearly, they're more socially sustainable. There's a sense of belonging, support, security, a diversity of people, and it's a good place to live. And when you don't have cars coming through the middle of the property, it's pedestrian, it's much easier to interact, and it's all designed for mobility, accessibility, etc. So I'd just like to introduce another co-housing project. This is older women's co-housing in London, in North London. And they have 25 apartments on less than an acre, so it's quite dense. They actually have 2/3 of those houses are affordable and 1/3 are private. And they've managed that because they've gone in with a housing association, which there are many in the UK. So the housing association actually owns the land and has given them a long-term lease, and actually owns 8 of the rentals in that neighbourhood. This is the site plan, just to give you an idea. It's sort of L-shaped with the common room, the common facilities up in the sort of top right corner there, and shared open space. There are lots of projects around New Zealand at the moment, lots of people working on it. There's 2 or 3 projects under construction at the moment, including Dunedin, where Dunedin City Council has bought one of those units for their social housing rental. So that's the start of that good model. And I also just really briefly want to introduce you to Waingako Village in Flaxmere, developed by Te Tai Whenua o Heretaunga. They have a total project of 120 houses that they're building for lower income people, of which there are 4 clusters of co-housing clusters of 19 units each. So they're specifically developing this for people with multiple needs, and really pioneering that co-housing model within that particular social system. So I can see I've run out of time, but in terms of affordability, that's to a large extent depends on the ownership model, of which there are many. And we, in our experience, the running costs are very much cheaper. And just to finish, there are some barriers that I think council could quite easily lower. Some are in terms of planning rules which don't recognise neighbourhoods, securing the land, which I think the inclusionary zoning would really help with, and things like financial help like deferred settlements or underwriting loans, etc. So, and I've written a book. If you want more information about this, there's a book available which really sets it out in great detail. I'm sorry I've gone over time.
That's great, Robin. Thanks for the reference to the book. Now, we don't have any questions at the moment, but I'm wondering if we go to Imogen and Brennan, and then we can maybe have questions. If it's okay with the presenters, are you open to taking questions once all three have presented? Okay, we'll take Imogen. And Imogen, you're canvassing the same topic.
Sorry, buttons. Yeah, thank you. I wasn't expecting to present today until it was confirmed yesterday morning. I'm a trapped renter. I have over 2 decades of experience of what that means, the consequences on my life, contributions to other parts of society. I'm also speaking on behalf of SARD, which is the Society for Alternative Housing Development. So SARD is an organisation that supports community-focused housing, which allows people and communities to play a leading role in addressing their own housing needs. This requires specific legal, financial, governance and management tools. For people like myself, it would offer an option of housing that's between owning and renting, but offers more security and rights than I would if I was just a renter. So predominantly these models are co-housing, cooperatives and community land trusts. Community land trusts provide the best scalable mechanism for attaining perpetual affordability, and as we've heard already, are really a great complement to inclusionary zoning. These houses all apply and allow for intergenerational housing, and as we've heard, exist elsewhere in the world. So I want to emphasise that community-focused housing is relatively a new sector in New Zealand, particularly with respect to community land trusts and cooperatives. So future occupants are involved in meeting their own housing needs. Community housing providers, which we've heard about in the previous September meeting, do great work and offer a different form of housing largely to those eligible for income rent-related subsidies. So it's a different part of the market generally. Community-focused housing results in higher social cohesion and resilience. Future occupants have semi-skin in the game because they're involved in their future housing needs from the outset, including the design process. Occupants develop a close relationship to their future neighbours and home through this design and then operational stages and phases. So through COVID, we've seen actually surprisingly a really rapid increase in housing prices, and I would suggest our intermediate housing market actually is now in more demand and has a far greater need than what we've expected and seen previously with other data that's been produced on this topic. So there's an urgent and important need to fix this. I can't stress that enough. Tamaki Makaura's economic viability and our city's vibrancy, I would say, is at great risk from this issue. Previously, there's been the idea that we need to sell land to be able to afford to provide for social and affordable housing. I'd like to emphasise that community land trusts would allow council to transfer land and earn an income from ground rent. It's not giving away land, it actually allows income to still be generated for council. I appreciate that councillors have busy high workloads and have a mountain of reading material to read. I appreciate that the council also has issues around budgets and resourcing. And on that, I would like to emphasise that inclusionary zoning actually allows us to deliver affordable housing to our key workers, of which their need is only going to get greater in a very kind of simple and easy kind of way. We're seeing this already occurring in Queenstown Lakes, and Hamilton tomorrow will be considering through their Waikato Community Land Trust exactly how inclusionary zoning can best suit and complement what they're trying to achieve there as well. So again, I would implore councillors to take an intervene and lead approach and really consider what does this look like, what does it mean? And how does the report in front of councillors today reflect an intervene and lead approach? I would implore councillors to consider already signalling to the market that inclusionary zoning is coming. I would implore councillors to consider commencing work now to support how inclusionary zoning would work and operate, i.e. through a plan change. And this would not be wasted work, because even if the RMA is amended, this work will still apply because the processes are most likely to remain the same. I would suggest council should already start looking at establishing a Tamaki Makaurau Community Land Trust. We've seen this already occurring elsewhere in New Zealand. We know how it works. It's not new, it's not groundbreaking, but of great benefit to so many Aucklanders. So I implore councillors to give key workers of this great city something to support and stand behind. Show true leadership and intervention to deliver secure housing for our key workers of all ages and stages in their life.
Thank you so much, Imogen. Now, at this stage, we'll take questions for Robin and Imogen, and then we'll go to Brennan. So first, Mayor Philgoff.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and my questions to Robin. Thank you very much for your presentation and for what you've achieved. I think it looks really impressive, and I like the choice that it gives to people who choose to live in an arrangement like that, which looks really attractive. Probably there's not much we can do on the financial side of helping at the moment because of the constraints that we have, but I'd be interested in your views on whether there is anything in our planning requirements that stands in the way of developments similar to your own, and what we might do to change those.
Thank you. Well, I mean, there are some planning barriers, if you like, because planning rules are often assume single houses rather than a neighbourhood of houses that work together. And I think that's the kind of fundamental paradigm shift really that needs to be made, is to include the possibility of neighbourhoods that are designed to work as well as possible together. I know that there is a group in Grey Lynn Co-house which had real trouble getting resource consent because of the parking requirements, for instance. We were with Waitakere City Council at that stage and submitted some changes to the medium density housing rules that were there at the moment, to recognise that what I've said about considering the neighbourhood as a neighbourhood rather than as single houses, and that related to density requirements, etc. So there are aspects which do unnecessarily, I think, get in the way just because council perhaps doesn't see that as a possibility.
Thank you. That's something I'd be really happy for us to look at.
Thank you, Mayor Goff. And Councillor Henderson, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And I just wanted to sort of make a very quick point around Earth Song and all this kaupapa, and thank you for all of the work that's been done down there for all the way back to Waitakere days. Just wanted to point out to my colleagues that Earth Song is in fact right in the town centre. It's right next to the library and the supermarket pretty much in Ranui. So when we're talking about this kind of stuff, it's not just an option for rural or semi-rural areas, it's actually something that could be done right in an urban area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson, for that local knowledge. And Councillor Bartley, please.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. And through you, thank you for your presentations. I wanted to ask you, Robin, our report highlights that the worst affected by this is Māori Pacific older women. And I'm interested if you know, how London was able to really target and do housing specifically for women. So how could that happen here without breaching any human rights legislation?
One of the things about co-housing is that they are resident driven, and so it's generally a bunch of people who get together and say, this is how we want to live and we'll take the steps to do that. And so in London, that group of older women, that was their vision. They wanted supportive housing for older women. And I don't know the legal sort of details of that, but that's certainly that was possible within their system to develop their co-housing community for older women.
Councillor Newman, please.
Good morning. So, in a past life, I used to work as a lobbyist for developers. And what I can tell you is that what tends to happen is that they're quite bold up front with commitments for funding transport, water, wastewater, stormwater, as well as contributions to parks and reserves. Once the plan change goes through, then the narrative changes to a plea of poverty and the need to socialise all the costs. So if the developer is trying to maximise the capital value of the development, I'm finding it difficult to understand how inclusionary zoning is something that they're going to buy into, because they'll want to get an absolutely maximum return on the land and the capital investment that they have to put up front. So where's the incentive for the developer beyond the regulatory requirement for the inclusionary zone?
Who would like to have a go at answering that one? Imogen, is that your area?
It's not going to be
if you don't need to
community
answer
housing
that,
trusts.
if it's beyond your area of expertise or interest.
Yeah, I would suggest your council staff might be good at
Yeah, I
helping
think
you
so.
with that.
Okay. And Brennan might be able to respond to that after you've spoken, Brennan, or during your presentation. Brennan, welcome that. Councillor Collins, please.
Thanks, Chair. Robin, to you, I'm interested in, you talk about the diversity of the houses, the units and its availability. I'm really interested in the kind of ethnic makeup of the groups. I used to attend St. Malachy's, which is the Catholic church just on that, around the edge there. So, yeah, I'm keen to know what if Māori and or Pacific are starting to look into this as a viable option for living.
Thank you. We've always had a self-select policy, so we don't have any kind of selection process. So basically, whoever turns up and wants to be part of Earthsong and are willing to go through the process and commit are in. We don't have any say about that. So in that sense, we can't advantage any group or person. However, we also have a lot of visits from people around the country, and there's a lot of iwi around the country who come to Earthsong to see how we've organised things so that they can take those ideas back into their own papakainga developments. And that's, I could name many iwi who are working on that and incorporating the learnings from Earthsong. So yeah, it's a model which can translate into many different contexts, and I'm very excited to see that our local homegrown version developing. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. And finally, Councillor Walker.
Just a question to Imogen. Imogen, you've got some good notes. Is there any chance of circulating those? Because I couldn't get it all down. Don't need it straight away. Thanks.
Thank you. Imogen, feel free to send that through to our governance advisors, and we'll make sure those notes are distributed to the members of this committee. Thank you. Well, thank you, Robin, and thank you, Imogen. We hear the pleas pretty clear, and thank you. We know they're heartfelt. Councillor Coupon would like to move the motion of acceptance, and Councillor Henderson. Now, that is for Robin Ellison from EcoSong. We'll do them separately. Earthsong, Eco, Neighbourhood. Got it. Yeah. And all those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. And would Councillor Bartley, would you like to move a note of acceptance for Imogen? Councillor Casey, would you second? And we have that motion. And thank you, Imogen. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Thank you. Now, Brennan. Brennan Rigby. And we've got a presentation from you to Brennan to bring up. We'll show that now. Imogen, would you like to just disable your mic and then we can all hear clearly. Thank you.
Kia ora tātou, Mr Mayor, tēnā koe. Thanks, Mr Chair, for the opportunity to come back and speak with the committee, IMSB members and councillors. I've just been cautioned that I've been having a bit of an angry tone with some of my communications, maybe not with you, but I want you to know that anything I've communicated in the last few weeks, I mean absolutely no disrespect to either officers or anyone else involved in this debate. I just want to explain briefly why I separated myself from the questions with Imogen and our friend Robin. The reason is we're all here because we support inclusionary zoning, but we support inclusionary zoning from slightly different perspectives. I work for Community Housing Aotearoa, which is the national peak sector body for community housing providers who have been providing community housing services, shared equity, shared ownership for over 40 years. Got a photo, hopefully at the end of my presentation, of one that's come up recently. When I reviewed the Planning Committee's debate on the 3rd of September, I felt confused. I felt like inclusionary zoning was getting somewhat lost as a relatively precise policy question within the wider work program which was being reported at the same time. And I wanted to try and insert some information, some clarity around the debate, because from my perspective, the most important and the greatest opportunity for Auckland Council in your affordable housing work program right now is inclusionary zoning. To that end, just my first point is, Mr Chair, despite my time working in this arena, I don't know the process, but I would urge you to change recommendation A. I think it would be really problematic to stop any technical work on a possible plan change in the future, because we believe inclusionary zoning needs to come across the line, and I would hope that Auckland Council won't be at a standing start when that happens. So please consider that opportunity. So in my letter, in Charles' letter that we sent around last night, I acknowledge many of you won't have had a chance to read it. I tried to make a case for inclusionary zoning. Really the case is this. If you want a reliable, sustainable pipeline of affordable housing in Auckland, inclusionary zoning is absolutely your best option right now. I understand that you're balancing that against legal risk. There was a legal risk with the original Auckland Unitary Plan, but I urge you to recall that the governing body at the time wasn't bound to follow the independent hearing panel's recommendation that inclusionary zoning not be included in the Unitary Plan, and you are not bound by it now. I understand there's a legal risk, but the opportunity is a reliable pipeline of affordable housing in Auckland, and we don't have that. And I've read in here in paragraph 28 that there's a statement from the IHP setting out why they felt they were doing the right thing by recommending against inclusionary zoning, but that was premised on the fact that the 4 things they were proposing to do would create affordable housing. So I'd urge you to change that recommendation. I've attempted to make a simple case for the inclusionary zoning. It's in the letter I've provided yesterday. I want to speak briefly to Hobsonville. I noticed that it's come up a lot of times. Hobsonville Point is not an example of inclusionary zoning. In fact, I have hopefully got something useful. Where should I point this? Okay, I'll just do it from memory. So I've just pulled up some public information about Hobsonville Point this morning, and the most affordable dwelling I could find was a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom, 1 garage with possibly, if you could flick up a little further. Oh, there we are. No, it wasn't that one. It was $639,000 for a 2-bedroom apartment in one of the developments.
That's the one before.
Thanks, Councillor. Yeah. So, simply to make my point, Kiwi Build was included in Hobsonville Point. Yes, Councillor, to your point that there wasn't affordable housing. As you hopefully are aware, Kiwi Build doesn't remain affordable housing for the community. The Kiwi Build relative affordable model means that that value is lost to the first purchaser. That's okay. I think Kiwi Build was great because it got the government's build program working, but it's not delivering long-term affordable housing. Secondly, there were affordable housing included in the special housing areas, of course, but all of Hobsonville wasn't a special housing area. And so finally, on the Hobsonville point, I would say that if it had been developed under inclusionary zoning, I counted 18 separate developments which are currently that currently have units on the open market. So just to be clear about inclusionary zoning, if we had inclusionary zoning, each one of those separate 18 developments would include affordable supply. And I welcome Councillor Newman's question again, Mr. Chair, or I can respond to it now.
If you would like to respond to it now, I'm sure the committee would like to hear your response.
Thank you very much. So my first response is I think it's important not to cohort your ratepayers and your citizens and your residents of Auckland. I think it's easy to talk about developers, landlords, tenants, owners, but the reality is I don't see a democratic need to incentivise a certain group when we're talking about an important policy change. That's what we do in political decision making, in my opinion. My second point is, Councillor, that during the special housing area regime, what I understand happened was developers and community housing providers actually got together, and the developer said, "Listen, I've got this special housing area, and I need to provide X number of affordable houses." And the community housing providers were saying, "Well, don't build the houses and give us houses we don't need. Just give us that little bit of land, and we'll develop the houses that we need for our families." So there's an incentive in there, Councillor Newman, in the sense that the burden on the developer of needing to provide for affordable housing is one that can be shared with experienced community housing providers. And Duncan, if you're a magician and you can chuck that photo of Mr. Peter Jeffries up on the screen for us, you can't, that's fine. I was at an opening from the Court community housing provider earlier this year in Takanini. You know what? The houses look just like the houses in Hobsonville Point, but they're affordable. But more importantly than affordable, they're retained affordable. So the value of those houses will be retained in the community through the community housing provider in perpetuity. So kia ora, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the opportunity.
No, thanks for that response and the explanation as well. Really greatly appreciated. So questions of Brennan and Councillor Bartley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I want to see inclusionary zoning, and I've never been one to operate on a basis of fear, because then you never get anything done. But I think we're also having to be realistic that the advice we're receiving is that we won't win if this goes to court. So then we're wasting a whole lot of ratepayers' money on a court case that we were advised that we would lose. So what do we do then?
Thanks for the question, Councillor. In my personal opinion, there's an opportunity for you to continue with the technical work, preparing for a plan change without entering into the plan change process, which could well trigger that legal case. And listen, who knows the result of the legal case, but the reality is I believe there's a pretty sound agreement in the sector, maybe around this table, that obviously legislative support for inclusionary zoning is really the best way to do this. But as I said earlier, I think it would be a real shame, given the circumstances in Auckland, if Auckland Council is at a standing start when that legislation hopefully comes through. And can I add to that, just because it's on the same subject, I really like recommendation B. I believe a really clear advocacy plan would be incredibly useful, and I would strongly urge you to consider that being an advocacy plan for all Aucklanders to central government. So the likes of myself and Imogen and the groups that we work with and that we know and that we associate with can come on board with you in that advocacy plan. Yes, in developing that advocacy plan and taking it home or taking it to Wellington.
Thank you, Councillor Bartley and Brennan, for your reply. Councillor Newman, please.
Thank you for addressing the question that I asked previously. I'm not sure that I accept the idea of retained affordability, because I support property owners being able to build their personal wealth. In your letter you said, leaving it to the market has not produced a functioning, diverse housing system which houses New Zealanders effectively, nor will it ever do so. I think I agree with you, but I think that the reason why the market is what it is based on the value of the land and people needing to capitalise the value of that land. So I'm wondering where is the incentive for the private investment to purchase the land at a premium and then to have to effectively take a big haircut on the price? Because that to me feels like one of the things that has to happen as part of an inclusionary zoning outcome to ensure that there is a quantum of housing stock which is affordable, whether for a first generation or retained. You want to comment on that?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Newman, Councillor Newman, for the question. So I guess reiterating, but I'll add to it my first answer. The same concern was aired in relation to the special housing areas, but with the special housing areas there were incentives. So by applying for and receiving a special housing area grant, you were able to intensify and therefore take a premium from the development. And as I understand it from your own advice in this report, the idea of incentives is no longer really applicable to the inclusionary zoning conversation because of those those same sort of density dynamics. So I'm going to state my belief. So I believe that a great housing system must be one that can be profitable for developers, but we need to deliver on the human right to housing first. So I don't see us providing for the human right to housing, or whatever standard you want to use. I'm going to use that because that's my gig. I don't see that as necessarily being the last bit of profit that comes out of a development.
But I'm also wondering about how that argument works when the developer goes to the banker and puts that argument, because the banker is driven by other imperatives when it comes to lending the finance, although finance is really cheap at the moment anyway. But I mean, surely there is a need to maximise the value.
Well, some would suggest here perhaps there could be a social return on investment applied by the bank, but I'd also suggest that there weren't any reported instances of finance difficulties for developers during the special housing area regime. So, listen, I think the issue here is that we're moving into a new policy, right? We don't have evidence of how inclusionary zoning works in New Zealand. In Auckland. We do, of course, have evidence of how it works in New Zealand. And so all of these questions are absolutely necessary to address, but I'd urge you to err on the side of getting an affordable housing pipeline operating in Auckland as soon as you can.
Thank you, Brendan. And two more questions, Councillor Sayers and Councillor Cooper, to round it off. Councillor Sayers.
Brendan, thanks for your presentation. I'm sorry your slides didn't work up there, but my question's around what is affordable. So you had Hobsonville up there, and I think you mentioned a figure of around mid-600s there. So have you got a comment of what price is an affordable house, say, for that, as an example, or across Auckland? Have you got a comment there in terms of a threshold?
Sure. Thanks, Councillor Sayers, for the question. Mr. Chair, my answer is in line with international advice and advice that we've talked about around this table, which is pretty simply a family shouldn't be spending more than 30 to 35% of their household income on housing. So listen, the primary and greatest burden of that should and must fall to the government in terms of their public housing supply. There's no question about that. But if you want a standard that I think would be useful, you can think about any household or family in Auckland and ask yourself the question, are they having to spend more than 30% of their income on their housing? And that's a pretty useful affordability measure.
Thank you, Councillor Sayers and Brendan, for that. And we have our chief economist here. I can see him at the back of the room, who's got numbers galore on all of that in his head. So he'll be here for the item as well. Now, last question, Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. And if you'll indulge, just two questions. Thank you. One is, I probably need to sit down with somebody, or you, but in terms of creating that affordability, does that mean the cost is shifted on the people that just scrape out of the ability to get into that affordable market, like, for example, young professionals who are struggling to save up their $200,000 or $250,000 deposit? And then, so does that make the one they buy more expensive? Because I would imagine the developer has to shift the cost they're losing on one onto another. Do we create another group of people that then can't attain? That's what I'm just trying to understand.
So thanks for the question, Councillor Cooper. I think, to be realistic, we're not going to satisfy the demand for affordable housing.
Yeah.
So even with a great inclusionary zoning policy, we're not going to satisfy the demand for sub-market housing.
Level of, yeah.
And you know, the community housing provider network in Auckland have a backlog of families ready to go. Yeah. They've done their finance tests.
Yeah.
And the community housing providers are struggling to get the funding and financing that they need from government as well.
The sector is fantastic, and I think we've not helped a whole lot of people, government and councils, have not been able to really help fulfil on that potential. So the other question is just, the Mayor had a housing task force. Were you involved in that in the past? I thought community housing providers were.
I was actually with the IMSB during that period.
Right, so I guess, and I suppose it's a question, I think that you're right. I mean, when we kind of put together these recommendations, I think, you know, we do need strong advocacy, and I suppose your plea for community housing providers to be part of that. I might just ask the Mayor if, you know, if this could be a bit wider, and some elements, I know we said that we'd done the work that we were responsible for, but I think it'd be really useful, other than just councillors and some staff, to actually have someone backing us that has expertise alongside our staff to be advocating. I think we need an Auckland approach.
Okay.
If that's possible.
Probably more of a statement there. I think it might just finish with Brennan there. But yes, it was raised at the Mayoral Housing Task Force. I'll go to the Mayor. The main focus was about supply from the very outset, but it did not ignore inclusionary zoning or affordability, sorry. But what we're doing here is a product of a recommendation from the Mayoral Housing Task Force that it needed to be addressed in the very near future. But I'll go to the Mayor on that.
Yeah, and thank you, Brennan, for your presentation, which I thought was really good. We did make that recommendation, and even more powerfully, 86% of councils across New Zealand supported a remit at this year's Local Government New Zealand conference to actually set up an affordability working party at a government level. And I think, you know, I agree with what Brendan said about the advocacy. I think that's a really good channel that we can work through, build on, and we'd want to build on the expertise of the people that are at the front table here. But I agree, we have to do something about affordability. There are a range of options. I also agree that we're not going to do something through our unitary plan that's going to cost us a fortune in legal costs and then fails. I think, Councillor, as you mentioned earlier. So this is a good avenue, and, you know, would welcome the input from the expertise of people that have presented to us today to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Philgoff. Look, we'll wrap it there. And Brendan, thank you very much for your impassioned submission here today. And we get it. Thank you very much. Imogen to Robin, thanks so much again. Can I have a mover of a motion? Councillor Casey and Deputy Mayor moving and seconding. So, sorry? I was looking left. Sorry, Councillor Collins. Next time, I will glance to the right and see Councillor Collins. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. Declare that carried. Thank you, everybody. Now we go to local board input, and this relates to agenda item 11.